Alright, so today we're going to be talking about commas, ellipses, and dashes, and the standards that we're covering are the punctuation standards for language, including commas, ellipses, and dashes to indicate a pause or a break, which is what each of those is used for, and also an ellipses to indicate an omission. What you're going to need for this screencast assignment is 2 pieces of paper, at least, a writing utensil, and a highlighter, and that is a personal decision if you want to highlight your notes to differentiate the different rules for each of those punctuation types. So the first thing we're going to talk about is commas, because they have the most rules. A comma is used to separate words or groups of words so that the meaning of a sentence is clear, and there are 8 rules for using commas. Make sure that you are pausing during the video to take notes. I will tell you what you need to omit, but this whole screen should be on your notes. The title should be Comma Usage Rules, since that is what we're now talking about. We're going to move right into the first comma rule. Anytime you have items in a series, you're going to use commas to separate a list of 3 or more items. And remember that an item may refer to a noun, verb, or adjective phrase. For example, I need to buy eggs, comma, milk, comma, lettuce, comma, and bread, because you would pause when you're saying all of those words. So when you read it, naturally it would sound like I need to buy eggs, milk, lettuce, and bread. If you did not put the commas, that would mean that you're buying eggs, milk, lettuce, and bread, and it's going to be very difficult to understand you. So you do need to have the comma rule written down, and if you would like to write down the example, you may do so, but it is not a requirement. Comma rule 2 is going to be some of your favorite commas. It comes back to the conjunctions and using commas to separate 2 or more independent clauses. And remember that an independent clause is a complete thought or a complete sentence. So your conjunctions are for and nor, but, or, yet, so, also known as fanboys. And just note that the comma should come before the conjunction. Some of you, when you're using these, you put the comma after the conjunction, and that is not the proper placement for it. So make sure that the comma goes before the conjunction. And you will see that there's 2 complete thoughts or 2 independent clauses. I want to buy the new jacket, but it is too expensive. So I want to buy the new jacket, and it is too expensive are 2 sentences that can't stand alone, but they are connected by the conjunction but in this sentence. So make sure that you have the comma rules written down for and nor, but, or, yet, so, and the fact that the comma comes before the conjunction, not after. The next comma rule is going to be to separate a dependent clause, which is an incomplete thought, from an independent clause, which is a complete thought. And again, you can write down these examples. You don't have to if you're going to remember what that rule means. The phrase, when I get older, cannot stand on its own. There is no verb there. So it is dependent on the sentence, I will be able to drive. So you can take that part out, and the sentence would still make sense because the part that's left over is the independent clause. So you would have a comma separating the 2. And the same goes for the second example. If you are good, I will buy you a toy. If you are good is dependent on I will buy you a toy. And another example that I do want you to write down is without water, comma, the plant will die. Because the part indicating whether or not the plant gets water dictates whether or not the plant will die. Comma rule 4 is using commas to separate any word or phrase from the rest of the sentence that is not essential to the sentence's meaning. So when we talked about appositives, that's where these commas came into play. The phrase usually provides extra information about the subject of the sentence. My brother, a 26-year-old male, is watching TV. I can live without knowing that your brother is 26 years old, but it is additional information about the character, which may help move the plot along, or helps with characterization and figuring out who the brother is. And the same goes for the other 2 sentences. Amy Rivers, my best friend, is going to the mall today. I am ready for my dad, a hardworking man, to come home. So when you have parts of the sentence that can be taken out and the sentence will still make sense, you would make sure that you have commas around that part of the sentence, and it's usually, for this rule, the appositive or unnecessary additional information would be in the center of the sentence, as you can see in all 3 of these examples. Comma rule number 5 is using a comma to separate a quotation from the rest of a sentence. We talked about this when we talked about dialogue tags, and especially if you're continuing the sentence. So for example, we need to buy more sugar, comma, she said, comma, before it runs out. This means that she is still speaking between both of these. You're just including the dialogue tag in the middle. So on that second sheet of paper that you should have, you're going to write down the practice. So you're going to write comma rule number 5, and you're going to write the 2 sentences that you see here, and you're going to add the comma where they are needed. Please make sure that this paper has MLA heading because I will be collecting it when you come to class when this is due. So go ahead and take a few minutes to do numbers 1 and 2. Make sure that you have proper punctuation capitalization and that both of these are numbered under comma rule 5. If you need extra time, feel free to pause the video or rewind, but remember this one is asking you to separate the quotation from the rest of the sentence. The next comma rule is going to ask you to separate an introductory element from the rest of the sentence. So for example, hi, how are you? Wait are all introductory elements from the sentence that introduce where the sentence is going to go. So for example, hi, how are you? Would have a comma because it is a natural pause. So you're going to write comma rule number 6 with the rest of your comma rules, and then the practice is going to be written on that separate sheet of paper. And once again, you're going to copy the sentence exactly as it is there and insert the comma to separate the introductory element from the rest of the sentence. All right, comma rule number 7, almost done. A comma is used to separate the name of a city from a country or state. This should look relatively familiar from your comma rules that you did on quill.org. So again, just take a minute on your practice sheet to complete the practices. You do not need to write this rule on your piece of paper with the rules on it unless you choose to do so, because you do have your comma rule notes that include this rule from about a week and a half ago. So just take a few minutes to complete this practice activity. And again, feel free to pause the video if you need additional time. And the last comma rule is separating the day of the week, the day of the month, and the year. So today, if it was, is Tuesday, comma, March 11th, comma, 1943. So again, you need to write the comma rule down on your comma rule sheet and then complete the practice on the practice activity, adding the commas where they're needed. Make sure that you have the sentence with proper punctuation and that all letters that need to be capitalized are capitalized. Now we're going to move on to ellipses. And ellipses, which is the 3 dots, proves to be a handy device when you're quoting material and you want to omit some of the words. So sometimes if you're using textual evidence in your discussion or in a research paper, you don't need to include every single thing that an author wrote. So you would use an ellipses to take out material that you don't need. It doesn't assist your point. And these dots are all evenly spaced with spaces between the ellipses and the words or marks around them. So if you take the sentence, the ceremony honored 12 brilliant athletes from the Caribbean who were visiting the U.S., and you take out the Caribbean, the fact that they're from the Caribbean, you would then write the ceremony honored 12 brilliant athletes visiting the U.S. Maybe the fact that they're from the Caribbean is irrelevant to what you're saying, or maybe your whole essay is on the fact that they're Caribbean, so you wouldn't need to be repetitive in that sense. So you would use those ellipses, and if you look, there's a space right after the word athletes, and right before visiting, and these periods are evenly spaced among themselves. So please make sure that you have all 4 of these bullets written down before you move on to the next slide. And again, feel free to pause, because some of us write faster than others, and that way you can have the screen right in front of you as you're writing down the notes. And then the last punctuation that we're going to talk about is dashes. You don't want to overuse dashes, and you should only use them when you cannot do you cannot use a comma instead. So there's no spaces between the dash and the letters on either side. And in order to make a dash, you would make 2 hyphens. And when you click space, it'll automatically turn into a dash. So you have your examples there. Because in example 1, there are 4 names that are being listed, it would be confusing for your reader to read it as all 4 of them, comma, Bob, comma, Jeffrey, comma, Jason, comma, and Brett did well in college. You would use the dashes to separate those items in that series from the rest of the sentence. The word email receives a dash. You also use dashes with indicating time. So if a meeting is going on from 6:30 to 8:45, you would use a dash right in the middle. And then if you're saying that something is happening between a certain amount of numbers, you would also use dashes there. That is all for dashes, ellipses, and commas that you need to know from this screencast. For your next writing class, make sure that you have your notes and the practice sheet with your MLA heading and the examples with the answers. And be ready for a pop quiz on ellipses, commas, and dashes. Have a good night.